Good morning, gents. Apologies for not being there today. Hopefully we'll be back tomorrow. But look, watch this video. We're going to do a little bit of work on simple interest. So first of all, I guess the question I'm going to ask you is what is interest? What is meant by interest? So interest can work in two ways. They can work, I guess, in a positive way where we might earn interest, or it might happen where we have to pay interest, which is not as fun. So let's say, for example, you lend your friend some money. You lend them $100 out of the kindness of your heart, and they say, we're going to repay it back in a year's time. Well, they've had your $100 for that entire year. That's not really fair to you. So you might charge them some interest, right? And you might say you might charge them 10% interest, which means that at the end of the year, you are going to be getting back $10 of interest. Okay, but likewise, you might be the one who's borrowing the money, and you're being charged the 10% of interest, and so now you owe the $10. Okay, so interest is basically an extra amount, or let's say a percentage that we either earn or have to pay for either lending or borrowing money. So I'm going to say that one again. So interest is basically an extra amount of money or a percentage that we earn or have to pay for either lending or borrowing money. So if you lend the bank some money, for example, then you're going to get the money back into your pocket. But if you borrow the money from the bank, then you're going to have to pay that money back. And so the interest is what we refer to as either simple interest, or you might remember that word compound interest, which is a little bit more complex. So simple interest, and this is the important part to write down, is that simple interest is given by the formula I equals PRN. That's really important. That's a formula you need to remember. I, obviously, in this case, means the simple interest, so let's make sure that you're writing this down. We have P, which refers to the principal, okay? So the principal amount. Now that means however much you borrowed or how much you have lent, so it's the original amount. I might put there the original amount. And then R is the percentage or the interest rate. So we'll say the interest rate. And I'm going to put in the brackets a percentage. And we often give that as a decimal. Okay, I think that's better to use. And then N is the number of years. So again, that's pretty significant to remember. So that's what they're all equal. So let's have a look at a particular example. Now let's say, for example, 1, that we might borrow. We'll use a nice easy amount to start with, $1,000 at 10% per annum for 3 years. So hopefully we remember that the PA means per annum, which means per year. Okay, so it means over the course of an entire year, you're having to pay an extra 10% on top of what you've borrowed. So first of all, we want to work out what our interest is equal to. So interest equals the principal amount times the interest rate, which is the 10%, times it by the number of years. Now you know that I like to use a decimal as opposed from any other number, so I'm going to put 0.1 times 3. But of course you can use a percentage, or you can use a fraction, 10 over 100 or 1 over 10. Now if we do that, we're going to be, it should be $1,000, shouldn't it? So we're doing 10% of $1,000, that's $100, times it by 3 years, we end up making $300. Now we can do that without a calculator, or we can do it with, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but again, just typing in 1,000 times 0.1 times 3. So that means over the course of the 3 years, I'm paying an extra $300. Now, I guess the biggest thing, and I didn't really put a question on this, I just gave you some details around it. They might ask you, how much interest, or they might ask you how much you have to repay. And that's probably the biggest thing that you have to be careful of, because they're going to be two separate answers. So if I said how much interest do I have to pay, well, in that case it's the $300. But if it asks how much do I have to repay, well, that's the initial $1,000 that I borrowed added on to the extra $300 that I've having to pay in interest, which means I have to repay a total of $1,300. So let's look at a slightly harder example. Okay, example 2. Let's say, for example, in this case, I lend $1,000 at 10% per annum for 8 months. How much interest do I earn? It's a good idea, guys, to write these questions out, by the way, and make sure you write the working out into your book. Okay, so you've got these for later reference. Okay, so can you notice why this question is a bit more challenging? So if we talk about our I equals PRN, now I will say it doesn't talk about simple interest here, and I've got to say, whenever they talk about interest, okay, and they haven't mentioned the word compound, which we'll do tomorrow's lesson hopefully, then it's always going to be simple interest. Okay, if it doesn't state compound, then it's going to be simple. So in this case, I'm trying to find my interest, right? That's the one that I don't know. I don't know what interest is. The principal again is at $1,000. We've got the interest rate of that 0.1 or that 10%. And my number of years. Now this is the problem, that this is not in terms of years, right? If it was 6 months, you'd go, yeah, it's half a year. But how could I convert or write a value for 8 months in terms of years? Hopefully you might say something like, there's 8 out of 12 years there. Okay, or 8 out of 12 months. So we actually are writing a fraction. Now, if you want to write that as a simplified fraction by maybe dividing it by 4 and getting 2/3, then that's okay. But I would just leave it as 8 over 12, to be honest. So this is the number of years. And so that's the first way to do it. So what we can now say that interest equals my $1,000 times my 0.1, we know that's $100, and we're timesing that by 8 over 12 to find our final answer. Now if we whack that into the calculator, I think we're going to get something like $66.6 recurring. So let's do it to 2 decimal places, because money should always be 2 decimal places, and we'll say $66.67. Now it says how much interest earn, how much interest do we earn, and that would be my answer, and that would be it. Okay, so that's a slightly different question, not that much harder, but certainly different. Okay, we've got one more type of question to give. Now I pretty much refer these as kind of reversal questions. Okay, it's going to say something like this. I invest $100, again I'm keeping it easy amounts today, I invest $100 for 3 years and earn interest of, let's say, we'll say $15. What, or say, was the interest rate? So this is what I call a reversal question, because if I look at that formula and look, anytime I say interest and it doesn't say compound, I write down I equals PRN, because, gents, that gives me a starting point. Now in this case of things, we've got slightly different, because this $15 represents the interest, this $100 represents the principal, and this 3 years represents the N, which means what we don't have is the R. So if I plug that information in as it stands, we get something like this. We get 15 equals 100 times R times 3. So I call it a reversal question because we're kind of working backwards. Now there's all different types of ways that we could answer this. For example, you might say, okay, I'm going to simplify this right hand side. What's 100 times R times 3? So you might say that equals 100 times 3 is 300, and then we have R there. And then we start using some equations. You know, how can I find what R is on its own? Well, this is 300 times R, or R times 300. So the opposite of times 300 is divided by 300. So I'm now going to type in my calculator 15 over 300. Now, remember, this will give us the rate as a decimal. So I get my calculator out, I type in 15 divided by 300, and on my calculator I come up with 0.05. Now, hopefully you can recognize that as a percentage to be 5%. If you weren't sure, remember, we could simply times the decimal or the fraction by 100 to get that 5%. And now we've worked out pretty easily that our interest rate is 5%. You could check your answer, of course, by doing 100 times 0.05 times 3, and that should come up with the $15. Now, as your answer, it wants to know what is the interest rate, so we have to give the percentage. We cannot say 0.05. That's a decimal. It's not a percentage. Okay, so we have to give it as the 5%. So again, you have those three styles of questions. A straightforward one, I equals PRN, where you've got the P, the R, the N, you plug it in, you get your answer. A slightly harder question where the N might be slightly different, might be months, not years, so you've got to convert that. Or a reversal question. And gents, the reversal question, they could be asking you to find the principal. In that case, they give you the R and the N. They might ask you to find the N, and they gave you the P and the R. The most important thing is write your formula down, plug the information that you have into it, and then go from there. Now, there are a couple of harder questions around, which I'll show you hopefully tomorrow if I'm back, and then we'll see how we go from there. I want you to have a crack at the questions that I've put down in our module for today. Give it your best shot. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email me. I am on my email today, and I can hopefully get back to you. Otherwise, I hope this has been some type of benefit. Have a look at the workings out in your textbook to help you. But otherwise, I'll hopefully see you tomorrow. Have a great day, guys.